are now heading forward to a panel discussion on art and AI, which is organized by the Goethe-Institut. And our host will be Paula Böhmer from the German Informatics Society. She's a policy fellow there, and she will introduce 3 AI artists to you, and they will talk about the interconnection of the methods of creativity and AI to shape the visions of the future, but also to critically accompany developments in the society. So, Paula, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Teresa, and hello and welcome to the panel Art and AI. Within the next half hour, I would very much like to take you on a creative journey into the field of artificial intelligence. Yeah, art and AI is an interesting mix because art has its very own and unique potential to critically observe technological change and also to positively influence the future of our society in which AI becomes more and more important. On the one hand, entirely new aesthetic forms of expression can be realized with AI, and on the other hand, art opens up new possibilities for consideration within AI research. Before I introduce our guests that we have here today, I would like to invite you, dear viewers at home, to ask your questions in the chat, because we would love to include some of them into the discussion. And if you have questions that are directed to a specific person in this round today, please let us know and write the name with it. Yeah, I'm very excited about this panel today because we have 3 wonderful guests here from Linz, London, and from Edinburgh that are all boundary crosses between computer science and art. The first one is an AI artist in residence at the Goethe-Institut and at the Research and Innovation Center on Advanced Industrial Production in Prague. She is a creative practitioner who works across technologies and disciplines, and recently has been working as a design thinker at the Satellite Application Catapult in the UK. A very warm welcome to you, Lily McRae.
Hello, hi.
Our next guest is a media artist and researcher. He is an expert in the design of human-computer interactions, and he directs the Ars Electronica Future Lab in Linz, the laboratory and studio for future systems at the interface of art, technology, and society. Welcome, Horst Hörtner. It's really nice to have you here today.
Hello, everybody. Looking forward to our discussion now.
Yeah, and finally, I want to introduce to you another artist, designer, and also an academic researcher. He is the Chancellor Fellow at the Edinburgh's Future Institute, and he also founded Future Everything in 1995, and has been a key figure in shaping the field of digital arts and culture for over 25 years, with a leading role in areas such as open data and human-centered smart cities. Drew Hammett, also big thank you to you and welcome.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
I would like to start off with a short question. You 3 have at least one thing in common, a computer science background and a background in art. Maybe you can tell us briefly, in the same order that I just introduced you, what came after what. Lily, which interest sparked first, art or computer science?
Well, I began with art in school, but then I studied computer science with a view to including it in my creative practice. And then I went to study art again. So a sandwich of art and computer science.
Okay, thank you. Horst, was it the same for you?
Yes, similar. Doing the one started with music. Dragged me directly into the technologies, and doing the technologies dragged me directly into this perspective of expressing topics via artistic approach. So the one kind of was there when the other came.
And Drew, how was it for you?
Yeah, I'm similar. I come from an arts background in the 80s, and in the early 1990s, I discovered digital culture, but then very quickly saw how the two could come together and how the arts and design provide a space to explore the potential of digital technologies.
Okay, thank you. So, for many people, when they think about AI, what comes to their mind is computer science and not necessarily art. That might have to do with the expectations that we have towards those disciplines. We associate computer science with ruled predictability, so to say, to put things into numbers. And art seems to be the opposite. We expect it to evoke a resonance or an individual experience. So Horst, that sounds very different at first. What new forms are created when these two paradigms meet?
I think the fundamental point is that both sides, arts and technologists working in that field, are looking or researching on the viability of those technologies in terms of artistic expression. So the idea is to find out in how far the artistic expression that you intend can be transported with those new coming technologies. That's very relevant because a lot of the artists would normally, art in a sense is negotiating or discussing contemporary environments that we live in, and no doubt these technologies are, forming our contemporary environment. We are living in that technosphere, so if you want to express something that is an expression in that relevant field, you can't really work, you can't artistically work without incorporating the meaning of those technologies.
Do you think that AI art is a hype?
I don't think it's a hype. I think it's highly relevant to do that at the very moment, because again, if you want to dive into the artistic expression on the one hand, but also into the meaning of those coming technologies for our society, then clearly you have to work with both sides of the end. So it is hyped in media, but I think there's a very, very serious investigation going on, as I said, the viability of those technologies also for the artistic expression, and vice versa. There's a lot of learnings also for our society that can be taken by the artistic interpretation.
Okay, and Drew Hammett, I'm also interested. Do you agree with Horst? What do you think about AI art being in a hype or not?
Is it a hype? I'd say yes and no. I think the arts are as guilty of hype as the technology sector, and certainly AI art has enjoyed a lot of interest. I guess the most current hype in the art sector would be NFTs, but there's a reason for that. Over recent years, we've seen really significant advances in the science, in machine learning and other domains, and also much greater availability of the tools. Tools and concepts that were really quite inaccessible to many people are now really available and are impacting on many domains, including the arts and creative industries. It's transforming the way that art is produced, is consumed across film, music, games, many domains. In the visual arts and performing arts, which is probably the sector that I think we probably represent the most, many artists today are increasingly working with AI tools, working with machine learning data as their material, and also exploring themes and issues around the technology through their work. And as artists, they bring a different approach. An artist might be looking for the mistakes, might be seeking to open the black box, looking for the poetry which results. And that lens brings something novel to the subject. In Edinburgh, and also in the UK with the Alan Turing Institute, we're working on AI and art, and we're looking at three dimensions, really. Firstly, how AI can fuel and equip artists. Secondly, and I think this is really key to the arts, and Horst was gesturing to this as well, the arts can help us to navigate and understand some of these profound societal changes. Both as researchers, but also for policy and the public. And then the third one that we're really interested in is we're also interested in how the arts can contribute to fundamental research within AI science.
Okay, thank you very much, Drew. It's nice that you already mentioned that artists use those AI methods for their creative practice, and we're going to talk about that later on. But now I have another question to Lily. Lily, I'm really interested. Doesn't that sometimes annoy you when artists talk about AI but don't actually know much about it?
That's a good question, but I would say no, it does not annoy me at all, because I think it's really important that artists should be allowed to use AI without having any technical understanding at all. I think actually it sometimes annoys me when people say that all art students need a coding background, because I think it's really key that all different types of creative practitioners can use AI without understanding it. I think this creates, approaching AI or technology without any prior technical understanding can actually create really interesting outcomes and new ways of interacting with these technologies. And I think that's really important because, I think it's really important we use AI in ways that it wasn't intended to be used, or ways that the designers or the developers didn't expect. And I think that's how, by using it in these novel ways and unexpected ways, then we begin to liberate AI as a creative and more of a radical tool than a mode of oppression or control. So I think it's really key that artists don't need to understand it to play with it.
Thanks a lot, Lily. There's a question from the audience coming right now, and I think it is, maybe to you, Lily, as well. What criteria can an algorithm use to decide what counts as a work of art and what does not?
Oh, that's an interesting question. And I guess an algorithm can mean many things. So whether we are asking a very simple algorithm to compare a piece of art to what it's been trained as to understand as art, I think that's the key thing. It's how do we train artificial intelligence to understand what could be art or what could not be art. And I mean, personally, I think anything could be art. So that's a really tricky problem as to what data do you put into the AI to train it to begin interpreting things and categorizing things. And obviously with categorization and data sets, that presents some, sort of discrimination or bias. So I think it's important we consider how we make our training data.
Cool, thanks a lot. There's another question from the audience coming, and this is to Drew, because you mentioned NFTs before, and apparently this is also a really interesting topic for our listeners right now. this person is saying maybe AI and art isn't hyped, but NFTs are hyped, but that's mainly due to all the money being made, right?
Yeah, I don't really know where to go with that. NFTs are a little bit of a black hole at the moment. There's an awful lot of discussion that tends to go round and round in circles on them. And really is a hype bubble with a lot of new technological developments, a huge amount of hope, utopian hope is invested in them. And with NFTs, I think it's a classic example. There clearly is a lot of potential there in around blockchain technologies generally. But I think some of the claims made of NFTs are a little bit thin. So yeah, I'm not entirely convinced.
Okay. Money is actually a good bridge to the next topic that I would like to talk with you about. The AI art scene in general. One can argue that AI art is elitist in several ways. It uses a complex technology that is a black box for the majority, designed by an intellectual elite of predominantly men, and embeds it into an art scene that already targets elites for much of its art offerings. Horst, isn't AI art then elitist in a double sense? How do you deal with that?
Good question. I don't think at the first end, and on this point, I totally share the remarks from Lily. I don't think it's necessarily elitist. It's everybody can work with it, but it's I can understand the point of where the question comes from. I would rather call it pioneering. It's like you are the first ones utilizing also these technologies, and maybe sometimes really in a totally wrong way, utilizing these abilities to express your own intent as an artist. So yes, it's elite in that sense that it's not really reachable from a broad community, so to speak. But when you think about back 20 years, AI was there as well, and wasn't hyped at all at this time, and only a very few have been investigating in that field. With that recent developments that AI has, or the methods of AI has brought, I think that has changed, and the attention got broader and wider. To that perspective, I would like to add also to the question of that walk to Lily. It's a very high philosophical question if an algorithm at all would understand what art is. I think that, and try to be as short as possible, but I think that art is intended. And we don't have any intention in artificial intelligence algorithms or methodologies. So the intention to create art is at least the necessity to have a collaboration between the artificial intelligence environment and the human, the artist. I don't think that there is a way how to algorithmically judge if something is art or isn't. That only sticks on the surface, and art is way more than the surface of the object, of the actual appearance. Conceptual art is one example of that is way more complex than it would be so easy to answer. So having an algorithm to judge about what is art and what isn't, I don't think that this would ever happen, really.
When we talk about creativity in general, that often has to do something with designing new things. So creativity as a topic in general already has something future about it. And I would like to talk with you about the future topic as well, because, yeah, Horst, you work at the Future Lab. Drew, you founded Future Everything, so this seems to be a key word. Drew, you deal a lot with how to use art as a method to design futures, and especially technological futures. Is that always successful, or does chance play the primary role?
Yeah, interesting question. So, yeah, the futuring is quite a powerful metaphor and also method. I mean, maybe to give an example with the last example where you're talking about, you know, is there elitism in AI? Well, what we can say is that certainly in the research domain, you know, the AI field is can be difficult to reach for a number of reasons. The research can be is you know, blue skies, but also you're often looking at well-funded research teams deep into their questions. And when one talks about ethical and fair AI, there's often a disconnect between the lab and impacts in the world, the implications of those developments. And the kind of, I think, rationale quite often in the research community is that, you know, we're doing work upstream. You know, we're not responsible for the applications or you know, how they are situated in the world, how they play out in the world. And that's where futures can play a really valuable role, because by working with futures and working with design or art to create tangible artifacts and tangible experiences, we can bridge that gap between AI research and the world, which is an imaginary gap anyway. But it can be quite a powerful tool to reframe research problems. And then also we can use art and design to tackle specific challenges within AI research. One current one that we're very interested in is explanation, explainable AI. Many people here will be aware that's a really, you know, key domain, and lots of great works happening there. But within the AI community, there's an increasing awareness that we need to broaden the frame for that. The research is often quite narrowly technical, looking at model interpretability, but not looking at human factors, not looking at social context. And the social sciences are increasingly having a voice in that, but we're really interested in what the arts can bring, what art and design can bring to look at explanation, to maybe reframe how we think about explanation, and bringing new techniques to increase transparency and also augment existing explanation techniques.
There's another question that just came from the audience, and it's not directed to a specific person in this round, so whoever wants to go first. It's what is your opinion on the Delhi project? Do you see in threatening the existence of a huge amount of designers?
That should go to Lily, I think, as her work is setting up on Delhi.
Yeah, I've been playing around with Delhi a bit, and it's, yeah, when I first saw it, I thought, wow, this thing is creating, you know, illustrations that are very, you know, convincing and stylized. But I don't personally think this will threaten. Well, as the technology is now, I think I don't think it threatens necessarily the career of an illustrator, but it could, depending on how it develops, I suppose. I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts.
I think Delhi as one of the examples again leads to one of our major research topics, that is creative intelligence, trying to investigate how creative artificial intelligence algorithm can be actually. And what we constantly learn by doing it, and we're focusing on music mainly on that end, what we learn from is that it is really the gold lies not in either artificial intelligence algorithms nor humans only, but what we've learned is this collaboration in the future and how both would benefit from each other in the best way. And I think Delhi is a good example. I think you still have to make your decisions. You still have, as a human, you're still in the work with Delhi. You would, and it would be nice if this would be more interactive on that end. But that is one of the topics, I think, true for Delhi, but also true for other artificial intelligence algorithms or frameworks. It is all about the collaboration with humans for the future that we should look at.
Yeah, so the more AI becomes part of our everyday lives, the higher the need to handle it even more responsibly. The ethical guidelines of the German Informatics Society state under the section Social Accountability that the design, manufacture, operation and use of our IT systems should contribute to the improvement of local and global living conditions. Horst, on the subject of the social responsibility of system architectures, what do you think are the two most important aspects that absolutely must be taken into account?
That is really difficult to answer in a very short time, but I try to be as short as possible. And I wonder if there are two most important, but the understanding of system architecture that is still established throughout our world, I think is not contemporary enough. The environments that we build and that we create as system architects, the technosphere that we live in, is part of our surrounding now, meanwhile, as important as a city, as important as a building infrastructure. But for the cities and for the buildings, we clearly have understood that it is super important to have an architect being responsible for the ethical criteria, for the social functions of the way how a city is constructed, for the social, ethical, and aesthetical criteria that a building in its existence and functions as a system needs to cover. And the architect, in that understanding, when we speak about civil engineering, the architect on that understanding is delivering that wide, holistic perspective when it comes to architecture. This is, in my understanding, totally missing when it comes to our technosphere. The system architectures there, they are more comparable to what I would say the Statiker or the civil engineers. But this architect approach that we have in our real world is not really reflected in system architecture. And I think that is fundamentally important for our future.
Okay, so we're actually kind of running out of time right now, but there is a last question that I would like to ask all of you. Maybe we go in the same round than we did in the introduction. What would AI be missing without art? Lily.
I think as Horst mentioned, something really important for me is the collaboration between art and AI. And I think treating an AI as a collaborator in equal measure. And I think thinking about AI as an equal sort of species, looking at Donna Haraway's ideas about non-humans, and I'm really interested in artists challenging the ideas around humans, categorizations, and value systems. So yeah, I would say this collaborative approach to working with AI, not just using it as a tool.
Okay, Horst, in one sentence, what would you say?
Well, artificial intelligence, left as it is without art, would have the tendency to run the road along towards digital capitalism on the one end, or would run the road towards digital totalitarianism on the eastern end. This is what we are confronted with. This is the existing modes that we have. Art would have the potential to co-create with all the system architects an understanding of a digital humanism that is so important, I think, for creating this environment that we live in.
Thanks. And Drew, in one last sentence, we're a bit over time, but please.
I would say that without art, AI research is missing the ability to surface the questions that are presently beyond both human and machine intelligence.
Great. Thanks a lot. With that, I would like to close the discussion. Thanks to all three of you. It was really inspiring. And also, thanks a lot to all the listeners at home for joining the conversation and enriching it with a lot of questions. I couldn't take them all in, but at least a few of them. Yeah, at this point, I would also like to thank Janet Neustadt from the Goethe-Institut who organized this format. And if you still have not had enough of the topic of art, I would like to invite you all to visit our virtual exhibition, Hardware Almost Feels Real. You can go on the website realoffices.net and you will find interesting art pieces there. And now, back to Teresa.